You're back. You're lost and now you're found.
Thank you. Good news.
All right, so we're just kind of keep my eye over there, see if Jim or anybody else pops up. But so I thought we haven't read any scripture in a long time, so I thought this might be a good place to start. So I was going to read just a short passage from John, first chapter of John, where it talks about Philip and Nathaniel being called, and it plays right into this chapter here. But it says, so this is beginning with verse 43 of first chapter of John. So the next day Jesus decided to go to Galilee. He found Philip and said to him, "Follow me." Now Philip was from Bethsaida, a city of Andrew and Peter. Philip found Nathanael and said to him, "We have found him about whom Moses in the law and also the prophets wrote, Jesus, son of Joseph from Nazareth." And Nathanael said to him, "Can anything good come from Nazareth?" Philip said to him, "Come and see." When Jesus saw Nathanael coming toward him, he said of him, "Here is truly an Israelite in whom there is no deceit." Nathanael asked him, "Where did you get to know me?" And Jesus answered, "I saw you under the fig tree before Philip called you." And Nathanael replied, "Rabbi, you are the Son of God. You are the King of Israel." And Jesus answered, "Do you believe because I told you that I saw you under the fig tree? You will see even greater things than these." And he said to him, "Very truly, I will tell you, you will see heavens opened and the angels of God ascending and descending upon the Son of Man." So a very simple call. And one of our questions talks about that come and see business. Anyway, so we talked a little bit last week about the introduction to this chapter, this book, and his purpose being to kind of accentuate the positives and the commonalities between Protestants and Catholics rather than focusing on the divisions, and then also hoping through the book to foster an interfaith dialogue and more mutual understanding. He also goes on. Did anybody watch the sermon? Because the sermon, no, yeah. The sermon is it's a little more dynamic than reading the book, and he kind of. But anyway, he talks in there about how the Catholics and the Protestants have been pretty much in conflict since the 1500s, to the point where it's become violent, such as in Northern Ireland and some other places. And he talks about there been waxing and waning of this relationship, and talks about there was apparently a paper released from the Vatican in the year 2000. I don't remember this, but it came out called Dominus Jesus, and it said that Protestant churches were not churches in the proper sense. And nobody was really sure what they meant by that, but it was a little bit taken as offensively by Protestants, as I imagine it probably should be. But with the election of Francis, we've kind of had a softening, and there was of the relationship. And then in 2013, there was actually something that came out of the Vatican called the Common Agreement on Mutual Recognition of Baptism, which is a real, which is a huge move to say, that our baptism, they recognize that. I know when Ellen and I got married, we met with a Catholic priest because we tried to have a Catholic priest at the wedding so my mother would come, and they were trying to get her to renounce her baptism, saying that she wasn't actually baptized. So we got, let's see here, we got Warren and Karen number 1. Karen number 2 tries harder up there in the upper. You try really hard now. You're in the upper left corner now. This you really are. You got here early. Hey, Karen. Warren, are you there? Oh, maybe he'll pop up there in a minute. And in 2017 was actually the 500th anniversary of Martin Luther nailing his theses on the wall on the door of the church in Wittenberg. So it's 500 years of this, and maybe it's good. Maybe it's time to reconcile, at least to some degree. And he also makes the point that that religious interaction and just getting to know about other religions. Nobody at this day and time, at any rate, nobody's trying to convert people to their religion. It's just a matter of understanding and appreciation. So you can appreciate your own traditions, but you can learn about other people's traditions, much like we did with Islam over the last couple months. We can learn about their traditions. We can see the similarities. We can appreciate the good things they're doing without giving up our core beliefs or our personal traditions as well. So he says the three key elements of interfaith dialogue and interfaith relationships is humility and a willingness to ask non-hostile questions and the ability to listen intently, something that we don't always do. And he says, the benefit of all this is that you can have churches working together on projects. I know back in Lynchburg, we had the Habitat houses were a big thing, and often there would be 2 or 3 churches working together on a Habitat house, and that was really pretty good, pretty cool. Here we have the interfaith in the Outer Banks. We have the interfaith group. Certainly the food bank is an interfaith effort. A lot of things here are a lot more positive can be done by cooperation than anything else. So chapter 1, and I'm not going to talk. I promise I wasn't going to talk the whole time here, but this chapter 1, he talks about the unusual pedigree of Pope Francis, and we talked a lot about last week about the Jesuits and their focus on mission and their focus on serving their fellow man, their focus on education. But his big question at the beginning of this was, what is it about this Pope that seems to be bringing people together when religion over the last 500 years has been such a divisive thing? And he said that what Francis has done is he's brought us from the Catholics from a period of focusing on doctrine and rules and regs and strict adherence to rules, and it's brought them into more of an era of let's do something about some of these ills in the world, and let's kind of not focus so much on doctrine and those sorts of things, and let's focus more on doing things for our fellow man, which again is a very Jesuit attitude. And he talks about that passage we just read from John, where when Nathaniel is called, Philip is called, and then Nathaniel is not. Jesus doesn't ask him, "Well, what's your opinion on rabbinical whatever?" He says, "Just come and see what we're doing. Come and see. Come and join us. Come and just see the good things we're doing." There's no focus on the doctrine. And one of the quotes there, he says that the Pope Francis is reminding people that the primary work of the church is to be an instrument of God's reconciling grace and love. So the reconciling is a very important word. And then he goes on, and especially in the sermon, he talks a lot about how religions, by becoming very focused on rules and regs and traditions, and this is the way we always do things, and that sort of thing, that if you come and visit, or if you're looking around, you tend to feel like, well, I'm not really a part of this, because I don't know, I don't want to say the wrong thing or kneel at the wrong time or say the wrong response or what have you. And he says that the more organized and didactic that religions become, the less inviting and attractive they become to people who may be looking for a church home. And he comes and focuses on that come and see. The very last, what Philip says to Nathaniel, and Nathaniel says, "What good can come out of Nazareth?" It's a little backwater town, and nobody important lives there, and nothing happens there. And what does he say? He says, "Come and see." why don't you just come and see what's going on. Give it a try. And again, he focuses on Francis being that way also, as being very welcoming. He talks about, the communion in the Catholic Church. If you were divorced, you could be the most devout Catholic in the world, but if you were divorced, you could not receive communion. And I can remember that from my childhood. We had a neighbor friend who was divorced, and a good friend of my mother's, and she would go to church every Sunday and take her kids, and they did the first communion and all that kind of stuff, and she could not receive communion. And he's softening that. He's saying, no, everybody's welcome, and and he's same thing with his stance on gays and those things. His first comment on the first question he was asked about that was, who am I to judge? Again, a very more inviting and more open community. So he talks about the three things about Francis. One is that he's very welcoming. The second is his walk with the poor, his associating with the poor, and he mentions the fact that he went out and on Maundy Thursday, traditionally, a bunch of cardinals would come and they would have a service, and the Pope would wash the feet of the cardinals. And his first year as Pope, instead of doing that, he went to a juvenile correction center and washed the feet of a whole bunch of kids that had been committed fairly significant crimes and were held in a juvenile detention center. So his focus on being with the poor and with the less fortunate. And he talked about God's focus is on the margins. That God and Jesus sought out people that were not upper class or the ruling class or what have you. And that that Francis sort of captured the imagination of the world by being very humble, by displaying this servant model, and being a comforter. They had in the video of the sermon, they show all these pictures of Pope Francis with kids run up to him, and they doing selfies with people in the Vatican Square, and just being out there and being involved and being with people rather than standing 6 stories up and giving off whatever message he had. The other quote that I really liked when he talked about the church should be more involved on the margins, as he says, is he called this Pastor Rock, he called the church a field hospital in the battlefield of life. And I just really like that analogy that we're not there. It's not just for us. I mean, we're supposed to be there for other people, and we're supposed to be a field hospital in the battlefield of life. So that's all I'm going to say. So we're going to talk about these questions. I sent those out the other day, and I think they really are provocative. And we'll see where it goes. But the first one says, Pope Francis attained remarkable worldwide popularity in his first year in office. But popularity can be fleeting, and how would you rate his appeal today? And what has changed and why? And we're 7 years into this, so he's still a popular figure. He still pops up in the news, but not nearly as much as he did. So what do you think about that? Do you think it was just like the shiny new toy, and now it's now the appeal is worn off, or do you think that there's just so much else going on that we're distracted, or what?
Maybe I think. Go ahead.
Maybe if I was a Catholic, I'd know more about it.
Well, there's certainly been some reaction in the Catholic Church, some counter push. There have been some. There are people that have, that want the Latin Mass back, for instance, and that really want to go back to more traditional stuff. So there has been a little pushback from the Catholics, although not so much. Karen,
Yeah, I mean, you gave us all the reasons you thought he was appealing to us, getting some of the Catholics back into the church that are divorced, that are gay, they're allowing them in there. But I think that now, I think some of the Catholics are saying that he might be too liberal in varying away from the scripture, and they're concerned about that. I do believe that. And that's their tradition, and he's just a little bit, well, I guess, too liberal, and veering away from the scriptures, what it says in the Bible, and that's bothering some of the Catholics today. But I do think he brought many Catholics back 7 years ago when he allowed them to take communion and allowed them to participate in the church. I think that was a great thing, and I agree with him. But I know what's going to happen in the future.
Yeah, there's a lot of church politics playing out in his reign. We have a good friend who's a Catholic priest down in the Hampton area, and he's pretty much off the grid with his whole parish, really, I think. But anyway, he just keeps saying, if you think the politics in the country are bad, you don't know the politics in the Vatican. And I was like, so let's have another drink.
Yeah, I think there's definitely some pushback, and I think there is a little bit of the shiny new toy. It's kind of like the first 100 days of the presidency. Everybody wants this guy, whoever it is. Well, maybe with maybe an exception or two, but most people want people to succeed. And so that first 100 days, you get sort of a honeymoon period, and people give you the benefit of the doubt, and then all of a sudden the criticism starts coming. One of the criticisms has been an ongoing issue with the Catholic Church is the sexual abuse business, and that's just been horrible. My own family members are, I have my sisters and all, they're diehard Catholics who wouldn't miss a mass on Sunday and all this kind of stuff, and now they're hesitant to give money to the church because it's all going to legal defense. They're hesitant they don't understand how it got to where it got. And I think Benedict, prior to Francis, was actually his job before he was Pope. He was kind of responsible, or his group was kind of responsible for squashing a lot of this and keeping it all under the rug. I don't know the politics behind why we have two popes, but I get the feeling that they just kind of pushed him up into the mountains to the retreat because of his previous history of kind of hiding this. And Francis has been more transparent about it, but I mean, it's still a huge problem. I mean, it's still popping up, and it's still a very divisive issue. I'll tell you a funny story. I went to Catholic high school, and we had our 40th reunion. It's been a while now. It's been 10, 12 years ago, and so we had a Facebook page, and people were getting on there. And we were finding people that you hadn't talked to in 40 years, and turns out that in Lynchburg, there's two Catholic churches in Lynchburg. There's one downtown, and there's one kind of way out in Campbell County. And the priest at the St. Thomas More out in south of Lynchburg was a high school classmate of mine. It was like, who knew? And so I called him up, and we sort of rekindled a friendship, and we would go out to lunch, once a week or once a month, or maybe every other week, something like that. It was funny because one week I had seen that there was a movie called Angels and Demons, which is the Dan Brown, the guy that wrote the Da Vinci Code and all that thing. Angels and Demons was actually written before the Da Vinci Code. But they made a movie out of it after the Da Vinci Code was so successful. Anyway, so I went to see this movie, and there was a whole bunch of stuff in there. It's a lot of it's in the Vatican, and there's a young priest, and he was just catching all this grief about the sexual thing, and in the movie they kept pushing him, and finally he says, well, at least we feed the hungry and take care of the poor. And so that was, I asked Richard Mooney, my friend, I said, what did you think of it? Did you see the movie? He said, yeah, I saw it. So what did you think of it? He said, well, it was a terrible movie. He said, but at least they got the point across that despite all these other things, we continue to feed the poor and feed the hungry and take care of the poor. So, I don't know. I think there's still got to be some sort of seismic changes in the Catholic Church to solve that problem. I think the celibacy thing is a problem.
When the church with me back in California, I went to Episcopal church, and my priest was a former Catholic priest, and he was married and had a young daughter. He was drawing the Catholic church on the street. He's Latino, man. Drawing a lot of that, people from that Catholic church to our church.
Yeah, so and he talks a lot about in the sermon and I can't remember whether it's in the book, but he told a story about the pastor Paul Rock. He told us a story about an aunt of his that married a Catholic man. It sounded like he was Italian, which makes it like a double whammy. But anyway, and they had a great uncle that was a Presbyterian minister, and told her point blank that that she would be going to hell. Because she was marrying a papist, and that they didn't really welcome her back to any family things and stuff. And so again, religion has been very divisive over the years, and certainly it's broken up families, and hopefully this era of Francis will kind of reverse some of that. So the second question is, what do you admire most about Pope Francis? But what about him and his papacy gives you pause? I think we talked a little bit about that, but he was Times Man of the Year, a number of years back. He's very much admired. And in the sermon, Paul Rock says, he said, thank God for a religious leader that brings us good press, because there's been so much bad press about religious leaders over the last whatever.
Well, I was going to go also back to the first question. The second question, what do I admire about him? All right, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay. Is his approachability, that he is user-friendly, not in the limousines and the palaces, but he is with the people and on the margins. That speaks to me that what one of the things I'm continuing to learn, that we are to share God's love and not just dictate to people, but to learn, to invite and come and see. And going back to the first question, what has changed and why? Boy, I'm getting feedback. Is I think it's a combination of things. I think it was a new shiny penny. I think other things happen in the world. And it's the human condition. We humans can take a long time in our faith journey and trying to understand the Bible and religion and faith and what God, Jesus, wants us to do. So I think there's some human condition in there. Period. I'm really enjoying this book. I'm going to go on mute because I don't like hearing myself.
Well, we can hear you fine. So, and some good points. But yeah, and I think, again, the pendulum, just like American politics or any other thing, the pendulum goes one way and then it goes too far and then it swings back the other way. John Paul II, who was Pope for a long time, 20-some years prior to Benedict, was the first Pope to go to a mosque. He was the first Pope to go to a synagogue. He really made efforts to bridge gaps between faith communities, which is the tradition of Vatican II, which is the Vatican Council that was in the early 1960s. And what came out of that was really, and I remember there being great optimism that this was going to be an era of, following Vatican II, that there was going to be this big era of people coming together and religions maybe getting back, maybe not the way it was, but at least to a point where we could cordially and work together in a positive way. And then that kind of went by the wayside with everything else that's gone on in the last 50 years. He does make the point that Francis is the first pope to become pope who was educated and ordained after Vatican II. So he's the first one that sort of grew up in this era of ecumenical effort, and so that maybe that's why he was more effective early on. But I think he's still a greatly admired person. I don't, I think, leaders, world leaders and all try to always get, to go meet the Pope, and, not that they're Catholic, but that just it's a huge number of people around the world that are still members of the Catholic Church. And so it's a big block of people that you'd like to have on your side. So, people still go meet the Pope, and I think he still does his popular things. I think he goes out into the town. Supposedly he even sneaks out at night, and with all the security, because they had a Pope that was, was shot, almost killed. John Paul was shot by a Muslim, actually.
Turk. This guy was Turkish.
It was Turkish, right? And then there was such a big thing about him. John Paul II went and visited him in prison, and they had this big, meeting, and the Pope forgave him for shooting him and all this kind of stuff. I don't remember when that was, but I remember when that happened. But yeah, he's not in the news as much. But I think that may be a factor of there's just so many other things going on that the Pope's not front page news anymore, at least not at this point. But I think he still has all those traits, that we talked about, the humility and the being out in the public and working on the margins, like Maggie said. And, so the third one, we can spend a whole bunch of classes on this third question alone, I think. But it says if a Catholic asks you why you're a Protestant, or vice versa, if you happen to be Catholic reading this thing, would you or could you respond in effect, come and see? And if so, what would they see? I think, and a lot of people are whatever they were brought up. They grew up as a Presbyterian or a Catholic or a Baptist or what have you, and that's just what you are, because that's the way you grew up. I think at least this generation, like our kids, we have all of ours that are fairly involved in church. We have one in a Presbyterian church, one in an evangelical Presbyterian church, one in a Methodist church, and one in a traditional PCUSA church. So they've kind of figuring things out on their own. Some of it is you get married and you come to grips, you as a family figure something out. But I don't think people aren't locked in as much as maybe they were a generation or two ago.
I'll try to answer again, and then I'm going to call Bob up. Stop that echo. I think my answer would be exactly that. I was born, baptized, raised Presbyterian. But again, in my personal faith journey, I'm working towards come and see. Certainly in other parts of my life, for a long time now, I know for me, it's more powerful to lead by example rather than to dictate. I learn better by example when people say, come and see to me, rather than get in my face. So I think for a while in all parts of my life, I was come on, let me show you. Just hang around me for a while. And people would evaluate or respond to my style, especially in the classroom, civilian life or military life. Okay, it's kind of nice and easy to be around and see what you're doing, hear what you're doing. Continue to walk towards my answer would be come and see, rather than I was born and raised. Never thought any different. Why should I think different?
Right. We had in our, I'm sorry, Bobby, you gonna say something?
Well, I was actually Catholic until my first communion. I was born into a Italian family. My biological name is Falsetti. So I still remember some of that and going to Catholic school. And I agree with Maggie. I think the best way to minister to other people is by the way you live your own life. It's not preaching. Certainly, if a Catholic invited me to a service, I'd be open to it. You know, I like knowing differences and I like making choices. And my stepfather was a Presbyterian, so I really welcome the more participation, the more, I thought, more structure that I could understand. So, again, watch my life, and you can see what a Presbyterian is like.
Mhm.
I also would have to agree with you, because I was baptized, and that's what I continued to worship. But when my son in high school joined a Jewish youth group, and because all of his friends were Jewish, and it was great. He loved it. I didn't think there was anything wrong with it, but I don't think back in the 60s, when I was a child, if I had invited to a youth group, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, I think my mother would have had a apoplectic fit. If I, we used to have these. They'd have dances at the teenage, in like the fellowship halls. They'd have back in the day. They'd have bands, and they would be at different churches. And every once in a while, they'd be at our church, at the Catholic church. But 9 times out of 10, they were at the Baptist church or the Episcopal church or whatever. And it was always a kind of, I want to go over to the this dance. Well, where is it? Well, it's at St. James Episcopal. Well, I don't know. So it wasn't very. What about our church? If somebody said, why do you belong to Outer Banks Pres? And you said, come and see, what would they see? Do you think we're a welcoming, open, non-exclusive kind of place?
I do, but yet we don't get a lot of diversity. And I don't know how we overcome that.
Yeah, they always say the church is the church hour on Sunday is the most segregated hour in the country.
Right.
And yet I don't think it's OBX Presbyterian's unique situation.
No.
For many years, I've been part of churches and communities where that's the question. That's the big question is, what do we do? Small groups, how do we get to the margins? How do we, for someone who was raised in a God-centered family, yes, I can tell you, OBX Presbyterian, you were welcoming, very welcoming. I think it's many churches' question of how do you get to the margins?
Right.
I don't think we were always like that. I think we went through a time where we weren't paying enough attention to newcomers. And we met, we talked about it, and I was on session at that time. And we decided at that time to only share coffee hour with the new people. And I think now we're a lot more welcoming. We're a lot more cognizant that, we need to minister to our visitors.
Right. And, we sitting right on the bypass, I think we do get a lot of visitors. And we got a lot of people that aren't going to become members. I mean, they come because they're here on vacation. But we moved here 2 years ago, and we were going to shop around. We started with the Presbyterian Church because that's what we had been doing, and our son's in the Presbyterian ministry, and found it very welcoming. I mean, we felt right away that people were introducing us around, and we just felt very comfortable. Some of that comes from the pastor. I know our in previous churches, sometimes the pastors are, I don't know, not as open to new people, or I don't know why, but we've had that happen. Does our church search out the margins? Do we? I mean, I think we do with with the ministries that we have, and maybe we could do better. Anybody have any ideas on that?
Well, we have AA meetings, and the one other thing I've observed is when one of that group or somebody who could be in that group comes in on a Sunday morning, it's hard to make them part of our service. Usually we end up one-on-one with them in the office or something because of the disruption. And I mean, I see it both ways. We should minister and welcome them, and yet it's not an hour that it's easy if somebody wants to be loud or disruptive or whatever to include them. I don't know.
I think the ministries that, Jeannie does a great job of getting us all involved with the food bank and
Right.
I'm blocking on the name of the shelter where we do the
Room in the inn.
And it makes you feel good that you're involved in some of those things, but one of the questions that talks about do you get involved? Here we have moved to a place where there really aren't ghettos. I mean, there are indigent folks here, and there are people that are in different economic situations, but this is a resort community. We've kind of isolated ourselves a little bit from some of these issues, the poverty and the race issues and things, but they're still here to a certain degree.
We might ask Nancy and Charlie Huff, because their life is dedicated to the margins. They both really live it and probably see where the need is more than us just going to the usual gatherings.
If you drive 764 east or west toward Tasmania, up there you get past that area. There's a lot of people in the margin up there, chairs. So you don't have to go too far to find people on the margin.
Right. And the last question is, have you distanced yourselves from the margins? And I sat there and thought about that question a lot, and we selected a place which we love because of the nature and getting out and the beach and all that kind of thing. But on another level, we've sought out a place where there really aren't the margins obvious. We're living a little cocoon really here. So have we made it difficult for ourselves, I guess is what I'm trying to say. But there's opportunities there. I mean, I think we just have to kind of actively seek them out, I think.
The ladies' circles talked about, since we have extra of the 40th anniversary shirts and sweatshirts, should each of the ladies buy one and give them to a homeless person? So we'd be walking around on the street, right, where we don't see them.
Right.
And I think it might be possible, Beth, to give some of those. Of course, they're all men at room at the end, but there are women's shelters in Manio that we take those hotlines to. That might be a really great idea for an evangelistic, an outreach type project. I like that idea.
Yeah. And then there's, is it the little Presbyterian Church in Manio? Don't they have a unwed mothers?
Yes, they started.
That's how that church started, I think. And so that's another ministry we could get involved with. But I think I guess the lesson from this first chapter is why is Francis so popular? or why was he so popular? Why does he continue to still have popularity, although he's not on the cover of Time magazine as often? But and I think that number one is his humility. You know, it's much like Jesus. You know, it's a very humble man. His ability to just relate and get out on the margins, like they talk about, and get involved in the community rather than living in a up in his, you know, papal mansion. He's in a little guest house and sneaks out and with the people. And he's intentional about that, and that's again that Jesuit philosophy, being very intentional, seeking out opportunities to find the margins and serve the margins, and we can learn from that. And then I think this idea of this whole series of working with other churches, we've been with Tanta and Joe, who aren't here, they're back in Ohio, and we got a long text from her yesterday. They've had a lot of people look at their house, so hopefully they'll be back here pretty soon. But you know, we have all these foreign students that are here. Well, not so much this summer, but in previous summers, there's, you know, hundreds of students from Eastern Europe, and there's some from South America this year apparently. And you know, could we minister to those kids that are here, young adults that, you know, are way away from home and probably pretty culture shocked. And it turns out that the Duck United Methodist Church already has they do a weekly dinner, and so but unfortunately with this COVID business, haven't been able to really pursue it. But that we had looked into maybe partnering with them since they already have a structure in place. And I know Tom, you know, he works with them a lot with they go out and they build ramps for people that need ramps into their house and all that kind of stuff. You know, so maybe that's the way to do this. You know, is you know, find our church brothers that already have these things established and join in and just say, hey, we want to come help on this project or something. Maybe that's the lesson we're supposed to learn from this first chapter. Still got a few more minutes. Any more thoughts on any of this chapter? Yeah, I think the you know, the sermon where this Paul Rock talks about the Nathaniel and Philip, and you know, it wasn't a huge doctrinal discussion. It was hey, let's come and see. Let's get something done. You know, let's and again, that's a very Jesuit thing. Let's be practical. Let's go fix this ramp for these people. Let's get these people some food. Let's take these shirts that are sitting in a closet somewhere and you know, get them to people that need them. Maybe we just need to maybe have that a little more on the forefront of our thinking.
Jim Perry is very involved in that student issue. He funds one of the students generally to come to the College of the Albemarle all on his own, has for years.
Huh.
He
I
never
know
talks about it.
I know we had a meeting or two last year with Ben also, you know, being the mayor of Nags Head, and you know, I'm sure he knows where these kids are and where they're living and stuff. And I think what we came to was that the Methodists were already doing this, and maybe the best thing for us to do is, rather than reinvent the wheel, would be just to go and find out who runs the program up there and just say, hey, look, we got 6, 8, 10 people here that are interested in helping. What can we do? What can we do to help you guys? You know, we want to be part of this ministry. So hopefully we can.
Molly Bass is another one that's been very much.
Yeah, she's somebody with this pandemic business that I haven't seen, and it's just, I hope she's okay. I mean,
She's okay every time I talk to her, but she's one who was very involved in behind the scenes, just doing for individual students. Good lady.
Oh, good. So next week is a chapter or a sermon. I haven't read the whole thing, but I read the questions, and it's about leadership and leadership styles, and so I think that should be an interesting discussion. Anybody, Karen, you're back. Any last comments?
I'm really enjoying this. I love being the Episcopalian interloper.
Well, that's good. The more interlopers, the better.
Good.
Yeah. Well, every church I've been in, I'm always I'm supposed to be the Catholic expert, and I haven't been really involved in the Catholics in 40 years. So lots happened and I don't know that much about it as I used to, but I think it's good to have this interfaith dialogues and like Pastor Rock says, is a focus on what we agree on, not so much what we disagree on, and let's peacefully coexist and let's get stuff done.
Right.
Yeah. So with that, why don't we close? Anybody want to close us with prayer? No volunteers? Okay, let's pray. Dear Lord, thank you for this opportunity for us to get together and to try to learn what you taught us so many years ago. Try to learn from your example with Philip and also from the example of Pope Francis, who leads with humility and inclusiveness and love for his fellow man, no matter who they are or where they come from. Let's take these lessons and apply them to our daily lives, and let's move forward and see if we can't grow in this attitude of cooperation and mutual respect. Thank you for your son, Jesus, in whose name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
All right. Great
Thank
to see
you, Tom.
everybody. So we will
Good
see
to
you
see
all next week, chapter 2.
Okay.
Have a
Thank
great
you.
week. Watch out for tourists. There's 300,000 people there now,
The numbers keep growing. They keep
Yeah.
growing.
There you go. Good.
Be careful, everybody.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.
Right.
Bye.